We were talking last night about Mom. When she was 54, she started getting these lumps on her neck. And when she was 55, she went to the doctor. The doctor said, Miss Abel, that's cancer. And you're not going to live very long. But if you take chemo, you might live a few months longer. But we're not talking years, we're talking months.
Wow.
And we were devastated. And we prayed our hearts out, and she went on chemo. And grace of God, within a couple of years, she was in remission, and she stayed in remission for a while. And it was just a blessing. But then, within a few years, it came back under her arm and her breast, and she had cancer again. So they put her back on chemo, and we prayed, and God took care of it. In our prayer wasn't just, God, please heal Mama. Our prayer was, God, she's a servant of yours. She teaches Bible classes to children. She teaches Bible classes to ladies. She teaches Bible teachers how to be Bible teachers. Just one, and she shows hospitality in the home. Lord, if you can use her life to be a blessing, please heal her so that she can be the blessing, so she can honor your son, so she can go back and teach her classes and do those things. And God healed her again. And it was all gone. Well, then, a few years later, after she'd been in remission for a while, it came back, only this time it was her cecum and her ascending colon. And so they had to take that out and plumb her back from her large and small intestines. And her father and grandmother had both had the same cancer in the same part of their body. And while she was going through that, I said, Mom, why is this happening to you? And she says, why not me?
Oh.
She says, besides, I wouldn't give for the experience. I said, what are you talking about? She said, if I used to get some weeds in my iris, she loved iris because her mom raised certified iris. And she says, if I get some weeds in my iris bed, I had to get those out. She says, now if I get some weeds in my iris bed, I got more important things to do. I want the people I love to love Jesus. And so I understand the value of things now because of what I've gone through that I didn't understand before. I see things differently because of what I went through. Consider it pure joy when you go through trials. It makes you more what you're supposed to be. You know, and so anyway, we prayed, and eventually she got over that.
Wow.
It was great. Well, it wasn't very long. It wasn't even maybe a year of remission. And here it came back again. And this time the doctor said, sorry, Ms. Abel, there's no chemo we can give you. The best hope we have is to do a bone marrow transplant. And so it was 36 or 38 injections into her pelvis.
Wow.
To get out enough to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And so they took all this out, and then they froze it, and then they injected it with chemo, and then they put her in a hospital, and they gave her enough chemo that her white blood count went down to 0.0. Her blood looked like Kool-Aid. You could see light through it. They put her in a reverse pressure room, and we almost wore hazmat suits to go in to see her because we couldn't touch her, we couldn't breathe on her, and because it was a reverse pressure, it blew the air out to us.
Yeah.
And we prayed, and the doctor said, Ms. Abels, you're not going to make it. For 8 days, you're not going to make it, you're not going to make it. And finally, on the 8th day, he said, I never had a patient with this much fight. And she says, it's not fight, it's faith. And so, sure enough, well, you're not going to get out of the hospital. Well, you're not going to get off oxygen. And finally said, we don't know what you're not going to do because you already broke all the rules. At that time, nobody over 61 had lived more than a year. She was 66 2/3, lived 3 years and 4 days.
Wow.
She set the record. I don't know if she still got the record or not, but Back in 1994, she had the record.
That's awesome.
Well, sure enough, after the chemo, almost 3 years later, it came back. And chemo wasn't an option, and bone marrow transplant wasn't an option. And we got a hospice bed in the living room, and all the kids were there, and we prayed and we sang. She loved us singing hymns. And about 2 weeks before she died, she said, "Don't weep for me. I'm going where I always wanted to be."
Oh, wow.
We cried anyway.
Yeah.
And one Saturday she said, "Jack, why don't you go back home and preach? And then you can come back." I'm okay. So I went back home to preach. I wasn't home an hour. And they said she went home. So she's gone. And the same non-Hodgkin's lymphatic lymphoma that she had, large cell and small cell, is the exact same diagnosis that Jackie Onassis had. Didn't live 18 months. Mom lived basically 15 years.
Wow. Wow.
Just grace of God. And during those 15 years, 25 people in her cancer support group were brought to Christ.
That's great.
I just love that. I love that. And sometimes going through trials, you get more done. And God's grace is sufficient. And sometimes when you say, "Lord, I want this thorn in the flesh removed," God says, "My grace is sufficient, and my power is perfected in weakness."
Yeah.
Some of the weakest people I know are some of the strongest people I know. And she is one of us. She blessed us richly. She blessed all her kids. And we'll always be in her debt.